Hi everyone. Um, Oil. Um, we all use it, and we use a lot of it. The thing is, peak oil. That term brings up a lot of debate. Most people say, "Oh yeah, peak oil is bull. There's all kinds of oil everywhere. Drilled here. Just release everything. Blah blah blah." Uh, all that would do is, yeah, it would increase the supply for a short time, but eventually we hit the peak again. It's a finite resource. Um, the governments and the oil companies have not been totally honest with the people on this. For those of you who know about peak oil and accept it and understand it, it basically is the easy oil is basically being depleted very quickly. And with all our technological developments and everything like this, it makes it much easier to extract the oil. Therefore, a field collapses much quicker. Um, these are facts. You can go on and check them. Uh, Now, I am putting a link to a documentary um, down in the description. Uh, if you're new to the term peak oil, if you're new to oil, check out this documentary. It's well done. I also have another video by the author of 1,000 barrels a second. That's what we use, which is approximately an Olympic-sized swimming pool every 15 seconds. That's how much we're using globally. Um, the well, getting back to peak oil, one of the big problems that we have is the fact that governments have not leveled with people. For some reason, the people that run the show think we're all a bunch of morons, right? And that they think people are idiots. I have an example of this. A while back, I watched an interview by Matt Simmons on local television. I was in the city not long after, and I ran into the reporter that did this interview. And I said, I was really amazed that you had Matt Simmons on. I mean, uh, but I noticed you never mentioned the term peak oil. He goes, oh no, we don't mention peak oil because the people wouldn't understand. We really can't tell them about it. They just wouldn't get it, and it would upset them. Well, I have to say, if you sat down and explained it to people and said, this is the situation, this is the real dog situation, and we have got to all work together and do something about it and grow the economy and do a whole bunch of things, but that's not what they want to do. Uh, it's like they're the parents and we're the children, and they want to, they figure they know best. They have the degrees. They have this. They have that. Well, you know what? There's a lot of smart people out there, and there's a lot of people who would turn off the lights, who would get smaller vehicles. Um, you know, uh, having an SUV is not a God-given right, right? I mean, if you want to pay for the oil, fine, but the amount of SUVs and big trucks that run around in this country, I'm telling you, it's unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. Uh, uh, so, oil is cheap oil fueled the boom or brought the United States to global prominence. I mean, it was the oil of Texas and Pennsylvania and Oklahoma that drove the United States, the U.S. economy, and it was cheap oil, and they used that oil really, to the max producing products and building factories and doing all this kind of stuff. And and the United States is they're the ones loaning money up until about 1980, 85. What happens is that you have the 1970. Well, number one, the United States peaks in 1970. Marion King Hubbard in 1956 said the United States would peak in 1970, or in around the early 70s, and it did peak in 1970, and it peaked at 10.2 million barrels a day. Now they're down, what, 6 million, 5 million barrels a day. The world is peaking now, or we're in that area. Some people say we peaked in 2005, but we're very close to that rollover. Well, how does this affect the economy? Well, if we're paying more for energy, if it's costing people, when it used to cost $250 to fill an oil tank, so it cost you $1,000 a year to heat your home. Now it's costing you $900 to fill an oil tank, and it's costing you $3,600 to heat your home. Well, there's a bunch of money that's not being spent in the economy. And the funny thing is that people have done just what governments have done, what the United States has done, as far as debt goes. When they had to pay for oil, they just printed the money, and the petrodollar, the U.S. dollar became the petrodollar, and so they've had an incredible ride over the last few years. But the debt that has built up in the United States, and Europe has done the same thing. Canada has done the same thing. All the countries of the world, and Canada's an energy giant, right? In as much as that, we would be number six if we would be number six if we were a member of OPEC, which we're not. But the energy problem, the energy problem fuels global war and the global economy. And the thing is that we had a choice we had basically two choices to deal with peak oil and energy depletion. And the first choice would be to level with the people, get programs where we went into conservation, public transportation, rebuild our cities so that people work where they live and live where they work, and get away from the individual automobile, stop now every place has this buy your own shopping bag type thing when you go to the grocery store. I mean, this came out in 2008 or something like this, right, when oil prices got high and bags started to get expensive. But they should have been doing this 50 years ago. But let me tell you the timeline on how I got to knowing about peak oil. The first time, I never heard the term peak oil, but I was in school, and this would have been in the late 60s and early 70s, and the teacher I had at the time, somewhere, I don't know where he got the figure from, but he said, we've got about 40 years of oil left. Now, when you're, 13, 14 years old, 40 years is a long time, and I was like, yeah, okay, great. But it always stuck in the back of my mind, and it sort of jumped out when we had the 73 oil embargo, oil crisis, and I saw my parents scrambling to put money into the oil tank. And then we got into the 1979 one, and prices went up again. And I was driving at that time, and I remember how expensive it was for fuel. And I mean, I was driving a Dodge Coronet. It was a 318. It was an ex-Mountie car. Oh man, it was great. But until tonight, I wrote it off. But that's another story. But uh, then through the 80s, it sort of stabilized, and oil dropped dramatically, and it stayed that way right through, into the 90s, and then it started to creep up. And but in 1999, I bought a car, and it was a small car, a little Neon. It got really good gas mileage, and I ran into a friend of mine who was a professor at one of the universities. And he said, "You got a nice car?" He said, "How's it on gas mileage?" I said, "That's great." He said, "That's good, because we got to conserve fuel." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, we only have about 20 years worth of commercial fuel left." That was in 99. So that puts us into 2019. This is 2011. That's only 8 years away. So one day I was having breakfast at a restaurant, and I was reading the paper. It was a Sunday morning, and there was a thing called the Nova Scotian, and in it was a book. Um, it was by Richard Defes, and it was called Hubbard's Peak. That was the first time I heard about Hubbard's Peak and peak oil. And I read that, and it was a real eye-opener. And this would have been about 2003, 2002. It was in April, anyway. So anyway, uh, Christmas night in 2002. Yeah, it would have been in 2002. And Christmas night on 2002, I was walking my dog, and I lived in the old neighborhood. And I was going along, and I seen this guy coming towards me. And when he got about 20 meters away, he called out my name, and I called out his name, and I hadn't seen him in a long time. And he was a geologist. He became a geologist, and we had hung out together when we were younger, and so we were talking, and I said, "Well, what are you doing?" And he said, "Not much." I said, "I got a real good bottle of scotch at the house." I said, "Why don't you come up? We'll have a few wets." He said, "Sure, okay." So went up to my place. We sat there, and we started drinking. And I said, "What are you working on?" He said, I'm working on various things." He said, "I've been traveling all over the world." I said, "What doing?" He said, "Well, we're scrambling, trying to figure out how to heat large buildings and cool them in the summertime." I said, "What do you mean scrambling?" He said, "Well, there's a big energy crunch coming." I said, "Really?" I said, "Peak oil." And he looked at me surprised. He said, "You know about peak oil?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I've read a few things on it." And then he proceeded to tell me how the Canadian government is preparing for a big energy crunch. And yeah, and it was funny. I noticed a lot of government buildings get a lot of insulation work done. After that, I would note this type of stuff. And but he told me that it's bad. And I said, "How long do we have?" And he said, "As little as 5 years, but it might be 10 or 15 years." But he said, "It's coming, and you should prepare for this." Um, so about 2004, I was talking to an older friend of mine who I did business with. And I mentioned it to him, and he said, "That's funny." He goes, "I was playing golf with the local uh, manager of the oil refinery at Esso back in 1958. And he told me we had about 50 years worth of oil left." So, you know, I'm not going by what I read on the internet. I'm going by what people that I know and trust have told me about oil. Anyway, I'm going to put the link to it. It's a really good documentary. Um, it discusses the economics of oil, how oil propels people to go to war, and so on and so forth. And I think you'll enjoy it. Anyway, I'll be putting up more stuff.